Philip, you're about to take up your new position as Warden of Cranmer Hall after 11 years here as Vicar of Claygate. Let's talk about evangelism, if we may, and let's begin perhaps at a quite basic question. I mean, sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Surely there's only really one way that you can do that.
Well, there's one broad area, Mike, you're right, which is sharing the good news of Jesus. However, there are a number of different models that evangelism falls under. Let me go through a few of them with you. First of all, there's what we might call proclamation evangelism. That's like proclaiming, declaring the good news of Jesus via a talk or a sermon. It's what happened on the first day of Pentecost, and it's what the church has done ever since. That's one model. There's what we might call seeker evangelism, often in a group, something like Emmaus or Alpha or Christianity Explored, which is helping people explore and discuss the Christian faith, what it means to them in a kind of group-based context, often around a meal. There's what we might call apologetics evangelism. That's not saying sorry for Jesus. That's defending the truth of the Christian faith against some of the claims against that. There's what we might call presence evangelism, which is simply kind of turning up, making clear that God is here, God is interested in what is going on. And finally, there's what we might call relational evangelism, which is sharing the good news of Jesus through the quality of the relationships that are built up between individuals or within a community over time. So it's a big area of evangelism. It's broadly the same thing, but there are a number of different ways of doing it.
Okay, so 5 or 6 different possible models there. So how might a local church go about determining which is most appropriate for its own context?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because while it's not the case of one size fits all, nevertheless there will be models of evangelism that are particularly suited to a particular church context. So say, for example, a church in a university town with lots of students around. Apologetics evangelism, that is defending the truth of the Christian faith and why it makes sense in a contemporary worldview. That can be really effective. Or in an environment where perhaps the church isn't visible or Christians aren't really seen, presence evangelism, simply turning up somewhere, having a stall at the village fete, can be a really effective way in of saying, look, God's interested in this community. Proclamation evangelism can be helpful, but is rarely effective on its own. It usually needs to be done in partnership with another form of evangelism. And an environment where people perhaps find, sitting in a group talking about quite personal things difficult, then a more relational model of evangelism can be really helpful. So it's a question of saying, it's good to do as many as possible, but which ones are going to be particularly fruitful given the people that we're trying to reach?
Okay. Well, relational evangelism, could you expand a little bit more on what you mean by that idea?
The goal of relational evangelism, as I see it, is to help somebody experience the love of God in Jesus Christ through the quality of the relationship that is built up over time. And in order for that to take place, it seems to me that the relationship needs to have at least 4 characteristics. Number one, there needs to be a very warm welcome. And a welcome communicates that this person matters to God, they are known to God by name, and he is interested in them. Secondly, it's about listening. So that is starting where the person is at, rather than starting what the church wants to say. That's helping them know that, they really matter to God, that God is with them, like he came alongside us in Jesus. I think the third characteristic of that relationship needs to be generosity. This is rooted in the grace that God has shown us in Jesus Christ. He gives us more than we could ask for, more than we deserve. He's not looking to get things out of us before he's given to us. So a relationship rooted in generosity is important. And I think the fourth characteristic is prayer. And because what prayer does is just, it's talking to God. It's just helping somebody else know that they actually can have a relationship with God, and that they can be friends with him through Jesus Christ. So, I think it's a question really of a relational evangelism that's rooted in those 4 things can be very effective.
So how about then ministry to seniors? Is relational evangelism always going to be the right approach?
I'm not sure it's always going to be the only approach or always the right approach, but I do think that relational evangelism has a number of characteristics that make it almost uniquely effective for sharing good news with older people. And I was thinking about why that might be the case. I think, first of all, it offers seniors, so many, what they're looking for, which is friendship.
Right.
Because the reality is that, I've experienced this, I know you do this too, Mike, among older people there can be so much loneliness, actually either because friends have died or because people are geographically or physically separated from others. And therefore it offers the chance for older people what they're really looking for, which is friendship. Secondly, it helps people, older people in particular, know that they're valued. Because it seems to me we live in a society where older people are often seen as a problem than a resource. Yeah. And a relational evangelism that says, you matter, you're important, you're loved, that can be hugely effective working with older people, that you matter to God. I think, thirdly, it starts where people are, and it's low pressure. I often find, older people don't want to be put under pressure. Some of them don't have the levels of confidence they had previously, and therefore anything that kind of makes them feel put on the spot can really put them off.
Sure.
And relational evangelism, therefore, goes at their speed rather than our speed. I think the other thing is it builds trust over time. I think we need to be fairly honest. For older people, a lot of them have had experience of church. Some of that's quite negative as well as positive. And that what relational evangelism does is help kind of people build trust because they kind of know people before they're asked to kind of commit.
Right.
And that really builds onto the last thing, which I think is it helps people belong before they believe. And I think it means that they can experience the Christian faith with all its care and welcome without having to sign on the dotted line. It allows people a kind of gentle way in and to experience Christian community and therefore Christian love without needing to be explicit about signing up.
Okay. So, Philip, how would you say that you've seen God at work in Connections over recent years?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a real privilege, Mike, to see Connections grow over this time, and I've seen God at work, I guess, in a number of ways. If I had to pick out a few highlights, it would be I've seen God at work through the welcome, the fact that as soon as somebody comes through the door, they meet a friendly face, they're told they're welcome, they're given a badge with a name on it, and that they know that they matter. That's been really powerful. I've seen God at work through the generous hospitality, the fact the coffee is nice, the cakes are nice. People say, oh, how much do I have to pay for this? You don't.
Right.
It's free. And that sense that God is a God of grace. I've seen God at work through that generous hospitality. I've seen God at work through the care of the team, simply how they care, how they listen, how they come alongside people, how they don't threaten, but they're just happy to start where people are. I've seen God at work actually through the blending of church folk and non-church folk. You can't tell on a Tuesday morning at Connections whether people come to church normally or not. It's not seen as important, and therefore, and therefore it doesn't feel like a club where people are in or out. This is just a community where all are welcome and where there's blending between church folk and non-church folk. I've seen God at work through the trust being built up, and therefore people what's been really interesting is that people have gone on a journey of faith from Connections to come into our 11:15 congregation. And I'm thinking a couple of people, they say, well, I'm not sure I really believe it all yet, but we know we're welcome here. Right. And that's really special. And that they know that they're welcome, that they're loved, and that they have permission to explore Christian faith without having all the answers. So that senses their welcome on the journey. And I've really seen God at work through that experience. I've also seen, interestingly, and this is a kind of byproduct, I've seen God at work in the team as well. And I'm thinking about, some of the helpers actually don't have a Christian faith themselves, but they have been blessed simply through serving on the team. I'm thinking of two people who've actually come to a living faith in Jesus simply because they looked at the Connections team and thought, wow, they're incredible. How can I have what they've got? And they've wanted to explore it for themselves. So if you like, God has been at work in the ways perhaps we might imagine, and some of the ways we didn't.
Yeah. Well, finally, Philip, is there anything that you might want to say to churches considering how to approach seniors ministry for themselves?
I think the thing I'd say as the overall vicar, or somebody who served as the overall vicar here, is that a flourishing seniors ministry is actually a blessing for the whole church.
Wow.
So I've seen younger people really blessed through serving in connections, whether that's people doing a Duke of Edinburgh placement, or some of our ministry assistants, or some of the people in the 20s who are looking for a bit of direction in life. And we've said, come and serve at Connections. And so the really exciting thing is just the way it's blessed. It's been a blessing for more people than one might imagine, really. And I therefore encourage every church to kind of go for it, confident that God will work not only in the people we're seeking to reach, but in ways we haven't imagined. And for me, I think Connections is a fantastic model that can be used in pretty much every church.
That's great. Philip, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.